The bedroom was silent, except for the hum of the ceiling fan, its steady rhythm broken when Daniel mumbled a name in his sleep, a name Emily had never heard before. Her breath caught in her chest, and fear crawled through her veins. Emily whispered, "Daniel, what did you say?" But he turned on his side, lips barely moving as he repeated the name again. The sound was so tender, so guilty, that it felt like a blade through her heart. The clock glowed 2:13 a.m., the hour when truth slips out unguarded. Emily pressed her palm against her mouth, terrified her gasp would wake him, and yet desperate for him to keep talking. His words blurred into nonsense, but that one name echoed like thunder in her mind. She stared at the ceiling, every crack in the plaster suddenly alive with betrayal. Questions poured through her. Who was she? Why was her name on his lips? And why did it sound like love? Emily sat at the breakfast table hours later, her coffee untouched, eyes fixed on Daniel as he scrolled through his phone. His smile was casual, easy, as if the night had been ordinary. She forced herself to ask about his dreams, voice trembling, but he brushed it off with a shrug, saying, "I never remember them." The lie was smooth, practiced, sliding off his tongue like silk. Emily's stomach knotted as she watched him, wondering how many times he had lied this easily before. The name haunted her, echoing between every beat of her heart. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, metal spoon clinking like a ticking clock, louder with each second. His eyes flicked up to hers briefly, and in that fleeting look she swore she saw guilt, like a shadow darting behind glass. Later that day, Emily walked through their living room, fingers grazing the framed photographs on the wall. Every picture told a story of vacations, birthdays, and shared moments that now felt hollow. She remembered laughing with him, believing every word he ever said. Her heart twisted at the thought that it all might have been built on lies. She paused at one photo where Daniel held her close, eyes bright with devotion. The whisper replayed in her mind, shredding the memory into something fragile and false. She whispered to herself, "Who are you really?" as her chest tightened, fear and grief mingling into something sharp. That evening, Emily tried casually mentioning dreams again, as Daniel folded laundry. He laughed lightly, dismissing the idea, and teased her for overthinking. His charm was effortless, the same charm that once made her fall in love, but now it felt poisoned. She smiled weakly, but her eyes studied his every movement, searching for cracks in the performance. Daniel said, "You worry too much, Em," kissing her forehead with calculated affection. The gesture made her heart ache instead of comfort. She turned away, biting her lip, hiding the storm building inside. Emily met her best friend Claire at a cafe the next day, hands trembling as she wrapped them around a steaming mug. Claire leaned forward, concern etched in her face, as Emily finally confessed what she had heard. Claire listened silently, eyes darkening with every word. Emily said, "It was like he was holding her in his dreams, not me." Claire squeezed her hand, whispering that dreams could reveal truths people hide when awake. Emily's throat tightened as she asked, "What if it means everything I trust isn't real?" The cafe's soft chatter felt far away, drowned out by the fear that her entire life was unraveling. Emily lay awake again, listening to the faint buzz of Daniel's phone on the nightstand. He reached for it quickly, screen lighting his face with a sharp glow. Her chest tightened as she asked softly, "Who was calling at midnight?" Daniel forced a yawn and muttered it was work, turning his back before she could press further. The explanation felt heavy, too simple for the unease that lingered in the air. Emily stared at the faint light seeping through the curtains, her mind looping back to the whispered name. Something gnawed at her, a cold certainty that secrets were nesting just beyond her reach. Her pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the silence that followed. The next afternoon, Emily emptied Daniel's jacket pockets while folding laundry and found a receipt tucked deep inside. It wasn't from their town but from a hotel 2 hours away. Her fingers trembled as she read the date, 2 nights ago. She tried to convince herself it was work, but the knot in her stomach said otherwise. When Daniel entered, she shoved the receipt back hastily, heart pounding so loudly she feared hear it. He kissed her cheek as if nothing was wrong, and she forced a smile, the slip of paper burning in her pocket like a live coal. Later that evening, Daniel poured wine at dinner, his voice smooth as he joked about work deadlines. Emily studied him, noticing how his charm flowed too perfectly, like a rehearsed performance. His eyes sparkled with ease, but she caught the flicker of tension whenever her gaze lingered too long. He asked why she was quiet, and she forced a laugh, brushing it off as exhaustion. Inside, her heart screamed, each smile of his landing like another lie carefully laid. She tasted bitterness in the wine, though it was sweet. The next day, Emily sat across from Claire at their favorite park bench, autumn leaves swirling around them. She confessed about the receipt and the late-night calls, her voice tight with fear. Claire frowned deeply, saying sometimes instincts were sharper than proof. Emily said, "What if I'm wrong?" her voice breaking. Claire reached out, firm and steady, and told her that being wrong was safer than ignoring the truth. Emily gripped her friend's hand, the air heavy with words she couldn't speak. The whisper haunted her still, threading every sentence like poison. That night, Emily lay in bed beside Daniel, pretending to sleep. The darkness pressed close, broken only by the hum of cars outside. Her mind replayed the whisper, the hotel receipt, the smile too smooth to trust. Each fragment piled into a storm inside her chest. Daniel shifted, his arm brushing hers, and she felt her skin crawl with the weight of questions left unspoken. She closed her eyes tight, whispering in her mind, "Who is she?" as though the shadows might answer. The silence of the room mocked her, heavy and merciless. Emily noticed Daniel typing quickly on his phone, then deleting the messages before her eyes could catch the words. She asked who it was, and he smiled, saying it was nothing important. The way he slipped the phone into his pocket made her chest tighten. Her heart pounded as she realized every trace of his conversations was being erased. The trust that once wrapped their home in warmth now cracked like shattered glass under her feet. Emily stirred her tea, hands trembling, while Daniel hummed lightly as though nothing had changed. She whispered to herself, "You're hiding something," and the silence that followed felt heavier than any answer he could give. The next morning, Emily asked again about his late-night work. Daniel laughed and said she was imagining things, his voice warm yet sharp beneath the surface. He leaned close, brushing her cheek with his hand, insisting she needed rest. His eyes, however, were hard, cold, and calculating. Emily's chest ached as she tried to believe his words, but doubt poisoned every syllable. The softness of his touch contrasted with the sting of his denial. It was gaslighting, twisting her reality until she wondered if she was truly losing her mind. That afternoon, Emily bumped into Daniel's coworker, Marcus, at the grocery store. He asked casually if Daniel had enjoyed his trip last weekend. Her stomach lurched, and she forced a smile, pretending to know what he meant. Marcus went on about a late-night meeting Daniel claimed to attend. Emily nodded, but her mind spun violently. When she left, her shopping bag trembled in her hands, her pulse echoing in her ears. The outsider had no idea what truth he had slipped into her fragile world. That night, Emily trailed behind Daniel's car after he left, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Every red light felt like an eternity, her headlights following at a careful distance. He turned down streets she had never seen him drive before, his taillights glowing like sinister beacons. When he pulled into a quiet neighborhood, her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst. She parked blocks away, chest heaving, terrified of what she might find if she stepped closer. Emily returned home shaken, every nerve raw. She sat in the living room with lights off, the whisper replaying endlessly in her mind. Her chest burned with questions, each one sharper than the last. Daniel entered hours later, whistling softly as though nothing unusual had happened. She forced a smile when he asked why she was awake, but her throat felt lined with glass. Inside, the contradictions tore at her sanity. If she didn't find the truth soon, she feared she would shatter under the weight of it. Emily ran into Marcus again outside the office building while waiting for Daniel. He casually mentioned how Daniel had left early last week to pick someone up, assuming she already knew. Her heart froze, and she forced a smile, nodding quickly before retreating. Inside, her mind screamed at the puzzle fitting together too perfectly. Every casual word from Marcus was another knife, carving the truth into her chest. She walked away quickly, pulse racing, pretending his words had meant nothing. But deep inside, she knew they meant everything. Later that night, Emily searched Daniel's drawer while he showered. Beneath bills and receipts lay a second phone she had never seen before. Her hands trembled as she turned it on, the screen lighting up with messages from someone saved under a name she didn't recognize. The texts were intimate, filled with longing, promises, and love. She felt the floor tilt beneath her, the air rushing from her lungs. The second life she had feared now glowed in her hands, undeniable and poisonous. When Daniel stepped from the shower, Emily confronted him, voice sharp with panic. She demanded to know who the phone belonged to. His eyes widened for an instant, before narrowing with rage. He grabbed the phone, insisting it was for work, his tone laced with venom. She shouted that work didn't whisper love in messages at midnight. His charm shattered, replaced by fury, his hands shaking as he tried to twist the truth. The mask had slipped, and in its place was a man willing to burn everything to keep control. Emily locked herself in the car that evening, shaking as she scrolled through the phone again. This time she saw photos, Daniel with a woman she had never met. Their arms wrapped around each other, smiles intimate as though they belonged to a life she was never part of. One photo showed a child between them, small and bright-eyed. Emily's scream caught in her throat, choking her. It wasn't just another woman. It was another world. The shadow had finally taken form. Emily sat frozen, the weight of the discovery crushing her chest. She thought of every kiss, every laugh, every promise Daniel had ever made. They all felt hollow now, like props in a staged performance. The whisper that started it all now roared in her ears, clear as thunder. She whispered aloud, "He has a family." Her body trembled, heart pounding against her ribs as if trying to escape. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was undeniable truth. And it had destroyed the life she thought was hers. Emily waited in the living room, the phone clutched tightly in her hand as Daniel walked through the door. She stood before him, voice shaking but sharp as glass, demanding the truth. His smile faltered, then twisted into irritation as he tried to brush her off. She raised the phone, showing him the photos, her voice cracking as she shouted, "Who are they?" Daniel's face darkened instantly, charm stripped away. He shouted back, voice like thunder, telling her she was imagining things, but the evidence glowed between them. Their voices clashed, echoing through the house like breaking glass. The argument erupted into chaos, words flying like knives. Emily screamed that she had given him everything, while Daniel barked that she was paranoid, his fists clenching at his sides. He reached for the phone, but she pulled it back, tears streaking her cheeks as she accused him of building a life with someone else. His mask cracked further, his voice trembling with rage, then softening briefly into pleading, saying, "It's not what you think." But the tenderness felt rehearsed, false, another weapon. Emily's heart split between fury and devastation. Hours later, Emily sat collapsed on the floor, Claire kneeling beside her. Emily's sobs tore through the silence, her chest shaking as she poured out everything she had uncovered. Claire's face was etched with sorrow, her arms wrapped tightly around Emily. "You don't deserve this," Claire whispered, her voice breaking with empathy. Emily clung to her, saying she couldn't breathe under the weight of betrayal. The air was heavy with grief, but Claire's presence anchored her, reminding her she was not completely alone, even as her world caved in. The next evening, Emily's suspicions were confirmed beyond denial. She followed Daniel again, heart pounding as she parked outside a quiet suburban house. Through the window, she saw him enter, greeted by a woman with dark hair and warm eyes. Then, a child rushed into his arms, his face lighting up with a joy Emily had never seen directed at her. Her heart cracked into pieces, each fragment sharper than the last. The shadow was no longer just a whisper. It was flesh, blood, and undeniable truth. Emily stumbled back into her car, gripping the steering wheel as sobs tore through her. The truth was final, merciless. Daniel didn't just betray her. He built another life, another family, while hers was left in ruins. She whispered aloud, "He never loved me," the words burning her throat. Her tears blurred the glowing windows of the house, where laughter spilled into the night. The sound became knives in her chest, each one cutting deeper. In that moment, Emily realized nothing would ever return to what it had been. The house was silent, but the silence felt heavier than screams. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her hands limp in her lap, staring at nothing. The confrontation replayed in her mind, every word echoing like shards of broken glass. Daniel walked in, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot, and for the first time she saw fear, not anger, behind them. He tried to speak, but the air between them was too thick with betrayal. Emily whispered, "There's nothing left to say," her voice flat, lifeless. The weight of finality filled the room like a storm that had already passed but left destruction in its wake. Emily sat at the kitchen table with Claire later that morning, her untouched coffee cooling in front of her. She poured out everything, the lies, the second phone, the photos, and the child. Claire listened quietly, tears brimming in her eyes, gripping Emily's hand tightly. "You can survive this," Claire said firmly, though her voice shook. Emily looked down, her throat aching, whispering, "I don't even know who I am without him." The pain in her chest was crushing, but beneath it, a spark of strength stirred, fragile but real. Daniel's mask crumbled in the following days. He paced the living room, desperate, promising he would fix everything, swearing that Emily was still the love of his life. But every word fell flat. Another lie laid over a mountain of betrayals. Emily stood by the window, her back to him, staring at the fading daylight. His voice cracked as he begged, but her heart had grown numb. For once, she felt the power shift. The man who had controlled the story now stood unraveling, while she held the choice of what came next. That night, Emily stood in front of the mirror, staring into her own reflection. Her eyes were swollen, but her spine was straight. She realized she had been shaped into silence by years of trust, but now silence felt like surrender. She touched her face gently, whispering, "You are more than his lies." For the first time, the words didn't feel hollow. They felt like armor. Behind her, the empty room seemed to watch quietly, as though waiting for her next move. She knew the ruin of her old life was the beginning of another. Emily packed a small suitcase slowly, each folded piece of clothing a step away from the life she had built with him. Daniel sat on the couch, head in his hands, unable to stop her. She paused once, glancing at him, but the ache in her chest had hardened into resolve. She whispered, "I'm done," and carried her bag toward the door. The weight on her shoulders was heavy, but it was hers alone now. Behind her, the house felt like a graveyard, filled with ghosts of trust, love, and laughter. Ahead of her lay the unknown, terrifying, but finally hers. Emily walked through the quiet neighborhood one last time, her suitcase rolling softly behind her. She stopped outside the house where Daniel's other life thrived. Through the lit window, she saw the woman laughing as the child climbed into Daniel's arms. The scene was warm, ordinary, but it carved her open like a blade. She whispered, "This was never mine," and her chest tightened as if the words themselves broke her ribs. For a moment, she stood frozen, memorizing the betrayal in motion, before turning away into the night. Inside the house, Daniel's face shifted as he caught sight of Emily outside before she disappeared into darkness. For a fleeting second, guilt flashed across his features, but he forced a smile for the child. He bent down, hugging the boy tightly, murmuring words Emily couldn't hear. His life continued seamlessly, his double existence woven into domestic comfort. Yet the flicker of his eyes toward the window betrayed a fracture, a shadow of the truth he could never erase. Emily walked into Claire's apartment hours later, shoulders heavy but spine straight. She collapsed into her friend's arms, sobs shaking her frame until she could barely breathe. Claire held her fiercely, whispering that she was free now, that the truth, as cruel as it was, had released her. Emily whispered, "I don't feel free," her voice broken. Claire stroked her hair and replied softly, "One day you will." The moment was raw, both women clinging to each other against the weight of betrayal that filled the room like smoke. Days later, Emily stood at the edge of the ocean, waves crashing at her feet. The salt air stung her lungs, the horizon stretching endless and cold. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the pull of something larger than her pain. The whisper that had destroyed her life had also freed her from illusions. She whispered, "I will survive," the words carried away by the sea breeze. The tide foamed around her ankles, each wave washing a little more of Daniel away. That night, Emily lay alone in a quiet room, staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed down like a weight, but it was her silence now. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand with a message from Daniel. "Please come home." She stared at the screen, her breath steady, and turned it face down. With a whisper, she said, "Home doesn't exist anymore." The words lingered in the darkness like smoke. It was the final blow. Sharp and devastating, but it was hers, and it meant she could finally begin again.